Do you think it'd be fun to hang out with Snow White? No, you'd probably rather hang out with Elsa or Ariel. Snow White is sincere, but a little boring for an animated character. It's not like they didn't have a range of other personalities in the film either. Why make her like this? And why don't we see animated characters like Snow White anymore? Let's answer this by looking at the production history, and the animation itself, to see why this classic character could give Sleepy a run for his money. When the Disney Company first started in 1923, it was producing animation that usually consisted of anthropomorphic animals and objects. In 1934, they planned to release a silly symphony cartoon short called The Goddess of Spring, a retelling of the Greek myth of Persephone. And they said, let's give the cartoon really realistic human characters by giving the lead noodle arms. Nothing more realistic than that. They also had the characters sing operatically to give it a more serious tone. Because if there's one thing children want, it's more opera. Other than that, the short isn't particularly memorable, but it's cited as the first spark that would lead to a more serious feature-length story. The Cookie Carnival in 1935 was another attempt at realistic human form, after a gingerbread woman, Miss Bonbon, gets a total makeover to look human. She was animated by the oddly named Grim Natwick. He helped create Betty Boop, and would go on to be one of the 3 lead artists to design and animate Snow White. This is a drawing of Betty Boop, this is Miss Bonbon, and these are early concept drawings of Snow White, also by Grim Natwick. See any resemblance? Well, as we all know, Snow White ended up going in a more realistic direction. In fact, Grim Natwick was assigned Snow White precisely because he could draw realistic human anatomy. So, baby steps were being taken towards Snow White. Walt Disney wanted to push animated storytelling to the next level by creating his first feature-length animated film. But there was a concern that audiences wouldn't sit through some silly cartoon for over an hour. But people were sitting through live-action features, so Disney figured animated characters needed to be more like live-action, especially in how they look and feel. To achieve a realistic look, they used a camera to record live-action movements, and traced over those recorded images to capture the realism of the action. This process was called rotoscoping. In the production of Snow White, rotoscoping was used for all of the characters. A young dancer named Marge Champion was recorded on a soundstage to serve as the live-action model. Rotoscoping traces the live-action movements, but the animator still has to draw a unique character on the page, so the amount of tracing that carries over into the final animation is really up to the animator. It's important to keep this in mind because although it's obvious that rotoscoping was used for Snow White, the Prince, the Huntsman, and maybe the Queen, it was also used for the dwarves, and their animation is much more cartoony, carrying over less of the live-action movements. So what does more realism have to do with Snow White and her lack of personality? Rotoscoping has the ability to capture minute details in facial expression and body movement, so in theory it should always be the ideal strategy for animation, right? Well, not so fast. Let's talk about the dwarves as an example. They too were rotoscoped, but clearly to a lesser extent. Compared to Snow White, they exhibit very broad actions and emotions. Take this scene of Dopey getting startled. It's so exaggerated. There's a lot of animated anticipation. This whole scene is a textbook example of what makes animation believable and appealing. We never see Snow White scared because she's so brave. Actually, she runs away from someone in the first 3 minutes. That's a very normal reaction. I guess it's because she sees every harmless thing as a waking nightmare. Except of course the actual creepiest face in the film. Come to think of it, she gets scared quite a lot in this film. But whenever she is startled, we don't see any of the exaggeration that we see with the dwarves, and hardly any anticipation. It looks a little stiff in comparison. The heavily rotoscoped action acts as a kind of containment for creative expression. These earlier, sexier designs a la Betty Boop were discarded because Walt insisted that Snow White be demure. Following this direction, the animators conservatively stuck to the rotoscoped actions, and thus weren't given any creative license to show character and personality by going beyond the live-action tracings. Walt Disney himself summed it up best. The screen has too long been confined to what we can see and hear, to what the camera can show, things which reveal not the half of a man's life and his most intense interests. with live actors attempting to interpret the unseen, the emotions, the impulses of the mind. Now the animated cartoon, we have another perfected tool, another scope, for getting at the inner nature of things and projecting them for the eye and the ear. Okay, so what about the Queen? The Queen's animator, Art Babbitt, claimed that he didn't use any rotoscoping, but he wasn't the only animator for the character. Either way, the Queen still has realistic movements, but to a lesser extent than Snow White and the Prince. The Queen isn't a cartoony character, but the animation still feels powerful, in that it conveys emotion and intent. Much of this is due to the precision in the drawings, but another reason for this is her role in the story. The story beats are dictated by her personality, so we implicitly understand what she wants in every scene. The Queen's construction is also really effective. Her face is designed to have this intense stare, even when resting, and as the witch, her wily eyes and large mouth are always clearly communicating her thoughts. So through a blend of realistic yet broad animation, clever character design, and an active role in the story, the Queen and the Witch manage to exude the most character in the film. Contrast this to Snow White, who's designed to look innocent and wholesome. But just because a character is innocent doesn't mean she can't be expressive. Look at this character sheet for Snow White. She looks pretty much like she does in the final film, but there's an elasticity to her cheeks, and subtle expressions that never really come across in the final animation. Once again, the insistence on being demure, and the reliance on rotoscope stripped away the ability to include these kinds of expressions. Disney's insistence on keeping the character wholesome probably also caused issues for the story team, similar to how Disney artists found it far more difficult to write for the wholesome Mickey Mouse than his polar opposite Donald Duck. Not that relatable events don't befall Snow White. Her parents are dead, she's almost murdered, has a hallucinogenic episode, and goes into a coma. You know, for the kids. But for a character who is pushed to be as realistic as possible, she doesn't have any realistic idiosyncrasies, and doesn't really show any kind of thought process going on inside her head. I think when people watch the film today, we feel more for the sorrow of the dwarves, rather than the tragicness of Snow White's sleeping death, and that's at least in part due to the animation portraying Snow White as something to behold, rather than a personality to relate to. A heavily rotoscoped animated character, combined with a push to be completely pure and wholesome, something we never really see in real people, makes Snow White less of a relatable character and turns her more into a memorable symbol. This doesn't make her or the film bad. I wouldn't change a thing, it's a work of art. But notice how we don't really see any animated characters like this anymore, especially from Disney. Modern expectations of heroines have changed, and I think Disney is aware of this. But I also think Disney is aware of the fact that she is more of a symbol than anything else. Look at Snow White and Wreck-It Ralph 2, Ralph Breaks the Internet, where many Disney heroines come together in a single room. In this scene, all of the 2D princesses become normalized to the aesthetic of the CG era films, and it's Snow White, along with Aurora and Cinderella, that see the largest change, since they're the oldest characters. But Aurora and Cinderella seem to maintain some of their original poise, and even strike similar poses. Snow White is the only one that's completely reinterpreted. I mean, look at her, she's perpetually caffeinated. It's like Disney didn't really know what to do with her original characterization, so they just scrapped her identity and decided to parody it as an excuse to have a more expressive character. Here, we literally have a scene that contains my original hypothetical of which Disney heroine you'd like to hang out with. And Disney didn't even invite Snow White. They brought in someone completely different who looks like her. This film was an experiment. The novelty of realistic animated characters won the hearts of the audience at the time of its original release, and allowed Disney to become an empire. But it may do more to distance modern viewers from the characters. So maybe we'd rather pick another Disney character to get coffee with. But Snow White doesn't need that honor. She's a symbol of the entire point of Disney feature animation. Regarding Snow White, Walt said,
"Over at our place, we're sure of just one thing. Everybody in the world was once a child. So in planning a new picture, we don't think of grown-ups and we don't think of children, but just of that fine, clean, unspoiled spot down deep in every one of us that maybe the world has made us forget and that maybe our pictures can help recall."